He screams my name. It's not the sound of anger, not the sound I know from arguments over bills or misplaced keys. This is 찢かれた panic. It tears through the thin veneer of the courtroom hallway, bounces off the sterile tile floor, echoes off the impassive faces of junior associates and busy clerks. He's pointing at the papers I just served. His face is a mask of disbelief and absolute terror, blotchy and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. His mistress stands beside him, smaller somehow now, her carefully constructed composure crumbling, eyes wide, staring at the same documents like they are written in a language from another planet. She reaches out a tentative hand towards him, but he flinches away. His gaze is locked on me, pure hatred warring with sheer, unadulterated shock. The paper in my hand feels heavier than lead, light as a feather, both at once. It's not just a lawsuit. It's a reckoning. A mirror held up to a man who thought he was so much smarter, so much crueler. And in that mirror, he sees not my defeat, but his own impending ruin. The silence that follows his shriek is deafening, broken only by the sound of his ragged breath and the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. I stand perfectly still, feeling the weight of that moment, letting it sink into my bones. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. My world before was built on steel and paper, on contracts signed and licenses granted. It was the hum of busy phones in a small office I built from the ground up, the specific smell of fresh toner and stale coffee, the rhythm of deals closing and problems solved. It was mine. Every brick, every client file, every single registered document bearing my name. It wasn't just a business. It was my life's blood poured into physical form. Years of grinding, of late nights fueled by caffeine and pure stubbornness, of scraping together every penny to make payroll, to secure the next necessary certification, the next crucial license. Licenses that were more than just permits. They were the keys to the kingdom, the non-negotiable right to operate in a complex, regulated industry. Without them, you were nothing. With them, you were a player. I remember the day I got the final, most important one. It arrived in a thick envelope, sealed with an official crest. I held it like it was a newborn child. Trembling hands. Sat down at my desk, the one I'd bought secondhand, and just stared at the certificate, the official seal, the date. Tears welled up, hot and unexpected. Not tears of sadness, but of sheer, overwhelming relief and pride. I had done it. Against the odds, against the advice of people who said I was crazy, against the crushing weight of doubt that sometimes threatened to suffocate me in the quiet hours of the night, I had built something real. Something substantial. My husband, Mark, was supportive in his way. He wasn't involved in the day-to-day of the business. His world was finance, numbers, spreadsheets, things I never fully understood. He saw the long hours, the stress lines that appeared around my eyes, but he also saw the success. The company grew, slowly at first, then with more momentum. We bought a house, took vacations that weren't just camping trips. His support felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. He was my partner, my anchor. We had a routine, morning coffee together, rushed goodbyes as we headed to our separate battles, evenings spent debriefing, sharing the small victories and large frustrations of our days. Weekends were for us, for quiet time, for building the life we talked about. It felt solid, unbreakable. We talked about the future often. Retirement plans, maybe buying a small place by the water, traveling. My business was central to those plans. It was providing the financial security, the engine that drove us forward. He'd joke about being married to a workaholic, but there was always an undercurrent of pride in his voice. Or what I thought was pride. Looking back now, through the wreckage, I see it differently. I see something I missed. Something calculating hiding behind the easy smile and the reassuring touch. The first hint wasn't a bang, but a whisper. A small discrepancy in an annual renewal notice. Something technical about the corporate entity name associated with one of the licenses. I flagged it, sent it to our corporate lawyer. Figured it was a clerical error, a typo in some government database. The lawyer called back a few days later, his voice tight. It wasn't a typo. A formal request had been filed months ago to transfer the licenses. All of them. To a different company. A company I didn't recognize. My blood ran cold. The world tilted.
How? Why?
Who would do this? The lawyer, bless him, was cautious, legal speak, all it appears that, and it seems as though, but the gist was horrifyingly clear. The necessary paperwork, the signatures, they were all there. Officially, legally, my business licenses, the very foundation my company stood on, had been transferred to someone else. Panic clawed at my throat. I couldn't breathe. My hand shook as I dialed Mark's number. No answer. Again. Nothing. I left frantic voicemails, getting progressively more unhinged with each one. He didn't call back.
Not that day.
Not that night. He came home late, smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't wear. His face was unreadable. I cornered him in the living room, the lawyer's words still echoing in my head, the printed email clutched in my trembling hand. I remember my voice was shaking, quiet at first, then rising.
Mark.
The licenses. What is happening? He didn't confess. Not outright. He deflected. Minimized. Said there was a situation, a restructuring business talk. Corporate jargon. He said it was complicated, something he'd been working on. He was talking about my company, my licenses, my life. He spoke with a calmness that was utterly chilling, a stark contrast to the earthquake happening inside me. He said it was for tax purposes, for optimization lies. Beautifully constructed, plausible-sounding lies, built on a foundation of our shared life, our shared trust. I pressed him, tears streaming down my face now. Who is this company? Why wasn't I told? These are my licenses, Mark. My business. That's when the mask slipped, just a fraction. His eyes hardened. They're transferred, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It's done.
Done? Done?
Like flipping a switch? Like changing a light bulb? He was talking about dismantling the edifice of my existence with 2 words. It's done. I spent the next few days in a fog of disbelief and raw agony. The lawyer confirmed the worst. Mark had orchestrated it. Methodically. Using power of attorney I had foolishly given him access to years ago for general business purposes, trusting him implicitly. He had created a new entity, transferred everything of value, the licenses, the key contracts, even the business name itself, to this new company. And the owner of the new company? Not him.
Not me.
Someone else. A woman. The name didn't register at first. Then, the pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Late nights at the office. Business trips that seemed to extend unexpectedly. The subtle withdrawal, the emotional distance I had attributed to stress, to the pressures of his job. The perfume. She was his mistress. The name on the papers. It was hers. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He had weaponized my own business against me, stolen the literal and figurative foundation of my life, and handed it to the woman he was sleeping with. It was a level of cruelty I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just about leaving. It was about annihilation. He didn't want me to have anything left. He wanted to erase me. The early struggles were less a fight, more a drowning. I felt paralyzed. The lawyer explained my options, or lack thereof. Mark had been meticulous. The paperwork was legally sound, signed with authority I had granted him. Challenging it would be monumentally difficult, maybe impossible. It wasn't just a matter of proving he acted maliciously. It was a matter of undoing legally executed transfers. The cost would be astronomical, money I no longer had access to. My business accounts were frozen, tied up in the transfer. My personal accounts, less than nothing. The office felt alien. Employees looked at me with pity and confusion. Clients called, asking why contracts were being handled by a different company name, a different point of contact. I had no answers. Only the shame and the bone-deep exhaustion of betrayal. The business I built was now operating under someone else's control, someone who had gained it through deceit and infidelity. Mark moved out. No grand scene, just a quiet packing of bags while I was away, a text message saying he was gone. Vanished. Just like my business. Just like the future we had planned. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake from. One day, I had a husband, a thriving business, a secure future. The next, I had nothing but debt, a worthless office lease, and the echo of a man who had systematically dismantled my life. Friends offered sympathy, platitudes.
You're strong, they said.
You'll bounce back, but how do you bounce back when the ground beneath you has been atomized? How do you rebuild when every tool you used has been stolen and given to your betrayer? I tried to fight. Sent cease and desist letters regarding client relationships, trying to reclaim what felt inherently mine. They were ignored. The new company, her company, operating out of my old office, using my infrastructure, my client lists, even my operating procedures, was untouchable. They had the licenses. They had the legal right to operate. I had the history, the sweat, the tears, the original ideas. But in the cold world of law and business, that counted for precisely nothing. The deepening crisis was staring bankruptcy in the face. The rent on the office was due. Utilities. Loans I had taken out against the business's future revenue. There was no revenue. Only outgoing bills. The lawyer's fees were mounting, for advice that ultimately boiled down to there's probably nothing you can do. Each conversation with him left me feeling colder, smaller, more hopeless. I remember sitting in my empty living room one evening, the silence deafening. The house felt too big, too quiet, filled with the ghosts of a life that was a lie. I held a framed photo of our wedding day. Mark smiling, his arm around me, eyes full of what I thought was love. I threw it across the room. It shattered against the wall. I didn't even flinch. I just sat there, surrounded by the broken glass and splintered wood, feeling as fragmented as the picture. Despair was a heavy cloak, suffocating. I stopped answering calls. Stopped opening mail. The world outside, my front door, felt dangerous and cruel. What was the point? Everything I had worked for, everything I was, had been taken. Not by a market downturn, not by a failed venture, but by the deliberate, calculated malice of the person I loved and trusted most. It was a wound that went deeper than financial ruin. It was a wound to the soul. One rainy afternoon, weeks into this personal hell, I was staring blankly at a stack of old business records, contemplating just setting fire to the whole mess. Among them was a box of archived files from the very beginning. Receipts for software, consulting agreements, branding exercises. And then I saw it. A folder labeled IP, intellectual property. Early thoughts, logo drafts, website copy concepts, service descriptions, even internal training materials I developed over the years. Unique methods, specific processes I had created, refined, and implemented. It wasn't just licenses Mark had taken. He had taken the engine behind the licenses. He had transferred the shell, but the soul, the how and the why of the business, the very essence of what made it successful, that was still, technically, mine. It had never been transferred. It couldn't be transferred in the same way a license could. It was embedded in the way we operated, the materials we used, the language we spoke with clients. A flicker. Tiny, fragile. An idea sparked in the suffocating darkness. Intellectual property. Copyright. Trade dress. Things I had built, documented, used for years. Things that were now being used, without permission, by her company. My company, running on my stolen engine, fueled by my stolen ideas. I pulled the IP folder closer, my heart starting to beat a little faster. This wasn't just some vague notion. This was tangible.
Documented.
Dated. Proof of origin. Proof that I created this methodology, this branding, these materials. Proof that they were now using them. I called the lawyer again. He sounded weary. Probably expected me to say I was giving up. I didn't.
My voice was different this time. Clearer.
Sharper. Not the voice of a victim, but the voice of someone who had found a weapon. Forget the licenses for a second, I said. What about intellectual property? Copyright? Trade dress? All the materials I created, the processes I developed? They're using them. All of it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long one.
Then his voice changed.
A note of surprise, then something else. Interest. You have documentation? He asked. Proof of creation?
Dates.
Yes, I did. Meticulous records. It was an old habit, a bit obsessive, born from the early days when I was paranoid about protecting my ideas. Now, that paranoia felt like providence. This was the midpoint shift. It wasn't about getting the licenses back, at least not directly. It was about attacking from a different angle. They had taken the physical keys to the building, but I still owned the blueprints, the proprietary tools, the very knowledge of how the building worked. And they were operating my building using my blueprints and my tools, without my permission. The fight wasn't impossible anymore. It was just different. Hard. Still an uphill battle. But there was a path. A narrow, treacherous path, but a path nonetheless. The despair didn't vanish, but it was edged out by a growing sense of cold, hard resolve. He thought he had taken everything. He missed the foundation buried deep beneath the surface. The path wasn't easy. Gathering evidence took time, effort, money I barely had. We hired a forensic IT specialist to scrape my old company servers, to recover dated files, email exchanges, documented processes. We had to prove not just that I created the IP, but that her company was actively using it. This meant documenting their website, their marketing materials, even sending in a mystery shopper to experience their service and report back on the methods used. The husband and mistress, likely comfortable in their assumed victory, didn't immediately notice what I was doing. Or maybe they dismissed it, thinking I was just flailing, making noise. This was their arrogance, their fatal flaw. They saw me as defeated, broken. They couldn't imagine I had the capacity, or the hidden resources, to fight back strategically. The deepening crisis during this phase was the financial strain, the emotional toll of seeing them thrive, openly using what was mine. Every piece of evidence we gathered felt like a punch to the gut. Seeing my words on their website, my service model described in their brochure, knowing they were profiting from my years of work and ingenuity. There were moments when the doubt crept back in, whispering that it was too hard, too expensive, that I should just walk away and try to build something entirely new. But then I'd remember Mark's face, his cold dismissal, the sheer calculation of his betrayal, and the image of his mistress living off the spoils of my labor. The anger would flare, hot and purifying.
No.
I wouldn't let them get away with it. Not like this. The turning point came after months of preparation. The lawyer, initially skeptical, was now invested. We had built a strong case. A case not about the legality of the license transfer, which was their fortress, but about the illegal use of intellectual property that had not been transferred. This was my fortress, invisible to them because they never thought to look for it, never thought it mattered. They took the keys, but they didn't realize the engine was patented. Filing the lawsuit was a quiet affair on my end. A signature on a stack of papers in the lawyer's office. No fanfare. Just a deep breath and a signature that felt heavier than any I had ever signed before. This wasn't just a legal action, it was a declaration of war. Not just against them, but against the narrative they had tried to impose, that I was disposable, that my work was theirs for the taking, that they could steal my life and face no consequences. The suit wasn't filed against Mark. It was filed against her company, against the mistress. This was deliberate. It hit her directly, targeting the entity that was now her livelihood, the entity built on my stolen foundation. It was designed to blindside them, to target the seemingly untouchable asset he had given her. The licenses might have been legally hers, but the very operation she ran with them was infringing on my rights. And then the climax. The moment I had both dreaded and longed for. The moment they were served. I wasn't there when it happened. My lawyer called me a few hours later. He sounded almost gleeful. Said they had been served at the office, my old office. Said there was a scene. Shouting. Demands to know what this was about. Then came the call from Mark. He called my personal number, a number he hadn't used in months. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. Then I answered. His voice on the other end of the line was not the calm, measured voice of the man who left me. It was not the smooth, lying voice of the man who transferred my licenses. This was the voice of a cornered animal.
Raw.
Furious. Terrified. "What the hell did you do?" he shrieked. I stayed silent for a beat, letting his panic hang in the air. "That lawsuit. What is this? You can't sue her. You can't sue the company." His voice cracked on the last words. My voice was steady.
Come.
A stark contrast to his unraveling. "Oh, I can," I said. And I did. But the licenses. They're hers. Legally. He was grasping, sputtering. He didn't understand. He hadn't seen this coming. "The licenses, yes," I conceded, my voice dripping with a sweetness I didn't know I possessed. "But the way you use them, the methods, the materials, the processes, that's my intellectual property. Copyright infringement. Trade dress infringement. Unfair competition. You took the house, Mark, but you forgot I own the very unique foundation it's built on. And I'm suing the current occupant for using my property without permission." Silence. Long, heavy, pregnant silence. I could practically hear his brain seizing up. He had been so focused on the licenses, the tangible, regulatory hurdle, that he had completely overlooked the intangible value, the creative work, the very soul of the business he had stolen. He had handed his mistress a poisoned chalice, wrapped in a bough made of my ruined life.
You
can't do this," he finally choked out, the bluster gone, replaced by pure fear. "You have nothing." "I have my mind, Mark," I said, my voice low and cold. "Something you clearly underestimated. And I have lawyers who agree with me. And I have documentation. Years of it." He started to scream again, this time louder, a wordless roar of frustration and panic. He screamed about how I was ruining everything, how I was crazy, how I would pay for this. The threats felt hollow now, the frantic cries of a man who had just realized he wasn't playing chess. He was playing poker, and I had just revealed a royal flush while he held a pair of twos. I hung up the phone while he was still screaming. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. It was steady. The legal battle was still ahead, but that moment, his scream, his utter shock, that was the climax. That was the vindication I didn't know I craved until it washed over me. He thought he had won. He thought he had erased me. But I wasn't gone. I was just waiting, gathering my strength, finding the unexpected leverage. And I had used it not just to fight back, but to strike at the very heart of the prize he thought he had secured. The aftermath was a messy, protracted legal fight. They hired expensive lawyers, of course, but the evidence was compelling. My IP was well documented, clearly predating the existence of her company. Their use of it was blatant. The lawsuit wasn't about undoing the license transfer, which remained a complex legal mess. It was about stopping her from operating the business using my methods, my materials, my processes. It effectively hobbled her company. They had the legal right to operate in the industry, but they couldn't operate using the successful model I had created. They had to build their own from scratch, which is far harder than stealing a finished product. Mark became increasingly desperate. He tried contacting me again, this time pleading, offering settlements that were laughably small. He realized the damage this lawsuit was doing, not just to his mistress's new venture, but to his own reputation, his own career, which was tied up in his perceived business acumen. The man who had casually discarded my life was now begging me to spare his. I didn't take pleasure in his suffering, not exactly. It was more a deep, quiet satisfaction. A sense of cosmic balance being restored, albeit through the cold, impersonal machinery of the legal system. He had chosen cruelty and deceit. Now he was facing the consequences. The mistress was caught in the crossfire, a beneficiary of stolen goods now facing the penalties. I sometimes wondered if she knew the full extent of what Mark had done to get her the business, or if she just thought he was helping her start something new. Either way, she was liable for the IP infringement. Eventually, there was a settlement. Not everything I had lost. Nothing could truly restore that. But it was significant. Enough to cover my debts, rebuild a semblance of financial stability, and start planning a future that was truly my own, without the weight of his betrayal dragging me down. They had to cease using my IP, which crippled her operation and forced them to reinvent themselves or fail. The licenses they held were significantly less valuable without the proven business model to utilize them. I didn't get the old business back. That was gone, a casualty of war. But I got something else. I got my power back. I got the knowledge that I was not a victim, but a survivor. That my work had value, inherent value that couldn't simply be transferred on paper. That even when stripped bare, I had the resilience, the ingenuity to fight back and win on my own terms. The house was sold. The memories too painful to hold on to. I moved to a different city, started building something new. This time, the foundation was guarded. The licenses, when I got new ones, were held tight. The IP was registered, protected, legally ironclad. The scar remains, of course. The trust broken can never be fully mended. But it's not a wound that festers in the dark anymore. It's a scar under the light. A reminder of how much I lost, yes, but also a reminder of how much I found within myself when everything was taken away. The dry humor I developed is a shield, a way to process the absurdity of it all. The tragic element is the death of a future, the loss of innocent trust. The hopeful part is the resilience, the rebuilding. He tried calling again much later. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. He had shown me who he was, in the most brutal, unforgettable way. And I had shown him who I was in return. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.